The tray was still sticky with syrup when I placed my coffee down. That was the first thing I noticed. Sticky syrup on an old wooden tray, next to plates I'd borrowed from the bakery below. My apartment smelled like warm croissants and cinnamon foam. It was small, intentionally so. A walk-up above my own cafe where I still pulled shots every morning. Today was my turn to host brunch. Family tradition. Each month, one household played host. Usually it meant rooftop decks, garden patios, grand kitchens with marble islands. Today, it meant a second-floor apartment with scuffed hardwood and thrifted mugs. The door creaked open. "Is this it?" My uncle's voice floated in first, followed by his cologne and barely disguised surprise. He blinked at the low ceiling. My aunt scanned the room like it might collapse. Brooke, my cousin, in heels too high for these floors, gave me a once-over and smirked. "Still above the coffee cart, huh? I guess some things never change." I smiled, offering her a homemade muffin. They didn't know that cart made more in a week than her marketing agency cleared in a month. Didn't know I owned the entire block, including the trendy brunch spot she'd tagged on Instagram just last week. But I wasn't here to prove anything, not yet. "Come in," I said softly, "everything's ready." We gathered around the narrow table I'd pushed against the window. Sunlight streamed in over chipped ceramic and the smell of strong espresso. I had prepared everything with quiet precision, linen napkins folded, tea warmed, juice freshly pressed. But it wasn't enough. "Do you still run that little cart, Clara?" Brooke asked, stirring her mimosa like she was mixing sarcasm into citrus. She didn't wait for my answer. "I mean, it's cute, like artisanal poverty." Laughter bubbled, not cruel, worse, condescending. "Actually," I replied, "we've expanded to 4 locations." Brooke blinked. "Oh, good for you. I love how passionate you are about foam." Uncle Ray leaned forward, placing both elbows on the table like he was about to offer financial advice no one asked for. "But be honest, Clara, what's the plan here? Coffee forever, number exit strategy." I lifted my mug. "Always have a strategy, Uncle Ray." He chuckled, still driving the same Honda though. "It gets me where I need to go." They didn't know where I went in that Honda. To board meetings, to real estate closings, to silent acquisitions they bragged about without realizing I owned the signatures underneath. "You know," Aunt Lena added, slicing her scone like it was a metaphor, "your parents just worry. It's been, 6 years since you left that finance job?" I nodded polite. "7. 7, she repeated. "Time flies. I'm sure you'll land on your feet eventually." "I already have," I said simply, but they weren't listening. They never did. They didn't want truth. They wanted confirmation that I was still behind, still beneath them, still someone they could pity. So I let them have it. For now, plates clinked. Someone poured more juice. Aunt Lena wiped a non-existent crumb from the table, then looked up with a practiced smile. "You know, Clara, I always admired how independent you were. So brave to walk away from that finance job." "Not everyone can take such bold leaps," Uncle Ray added. "Most people would have crumbled by now." "It's not easy," my mother said softly, "living month to month like that. We just want what's best for you." Month to month, I took a sip of coffee, roasted in Guatemala, shipped to my warehouse in Queens, and distributed under 3 private labels I owned. "Things are stable," I said simply. "Stable's good," Brooke cut in, "as long as you're not just, surviving." She glanced around my apartment again, eyes pausing at the slightly chipped wall paint near the windowsill. "Though I imagine it gets tight living up here. You don't ever get tired of sacrificing comfort for dreams." I smiled. "Comfort's relative." "So true," she said, biting into a croissant I made from scratch. "Some of us just prioritize security." Security. I thought of my offshore accounts, my fully paid condo in Singapore, my controlling shares in a fintech platform currently negotiating with Chase Bank. "You always were the artistic one," Aunt Lena chimed in. "Creative, yes, but not always practical." Uncle Ray nodded in mock solemnity. "There's still time to pivot," he said. "Brooke's firm is looking for junior associates, something steady, good hours, health benefits." Brooke grinned. "We could get you in by next quarter. You'd be great at admin, very organized." I paused. Thank you, I said. Just think about it, my mother said, cutting into a slice of quiche. You could still build something real. As if what I'd built didn't already cast shadows over their entire portfolio. But I didn't correct them. I let them sip my house blend and talk about job applications like I was 22 again. They thought they were helping me stand. What they didn't realize was I already carrying them all. A lull settled over the table. They were halfway through their third round of mimosas, retelling vacation stories like they hadn't already posted every photo on Instagram. I reached for my phone under the table, more out of habit than urgency. One new message, COO, Cumberland Equity. Valuation confirmed. 870M IPO roadshow locked for Wednesday. Do you want Forbes or WSJ for exclusive reveal? Also, we just finalized the waterfront development. 68% ownership under Shell Dahlia 7. I stared at the screen, calm, unmoved, but something shifted behind my eyes. That development they just closed, the one Uncle Ray kept bragging about at family dinners, mine now. He had no idea he'd just signed over management rights to his niece's fund. He was officially my employee. Everything okay, Clara? My mom asked, seeing my gaze flicker for half a second. Just a work message, I replied. From the cafe. I nodded, of course. They smiled, assuming it was about running out of oat milk, or some barista calling in sick. Meanwhile, I was finalizing a deal that would shift control of 3 downtown blocks into my name. While they discussed wine pairings, I was positioning Cumberland as the silent majority shareholder behind their favorite restaurants. You're so diligent, Aunt Lena said, even for something so simple. We do our best, I murmured. Another ping. Investor call confirmed for 3 p.m. Press embargo lifts Monday 8 a.m., which meant I had 48 hours left to let them talk down to me. 48 hours left to let them assume I was struggling. After that, there'd be no more mistaking who was really at the table. I'd like to make a toast. Brooke stood, mimosa in one hand, camera-ready smile in the other. The table hushed. Even Uncle Ray looked up, proud. To growth, to grit, and to bold women who take risks. She looked at me briefly, patronizing. That thin, syrupy kind of acknowledgement. Even the small ones. Everyone chuckled. I didn't. We just closed our Series B round, she announced. $8 million, fully subscribed. Gasps, applause. Aunt Lena clapped like someone had just gotten into Harvard. Lead investor? Brooke paused for effect. Cumberland Equity Group. The table exploded in admiration. They only back top-tier startups. That's huge, sweetheart. We should be celebrating at the Ritz. You must have nailed the pitch. Brooke beamed, soaking it in. I stirred my coffee. No one noticed my hand tightening on the spoon. Because Cumberland Equity Group was mine. I founded it 4 years ago under a trust name. We backed 27 companies since inception. Brooke S. was the least impressive of them, but I'd greenlit it anyway. Why? Because I wanted to see how she'd treat someone she thought was beneath her, and because I was already 3 steps ahead of her next pivot. Well, I said softly, congratulations. Thanks, Clara, she smiled. Don't worry, someday you'll get to pitch real investors too. Maybe, I said, if I ever get into marketing. She laughed, not noticing I hadn't blinked once. Not realizing that the clause capping her salary until 2026. I wrote that the brand agency she just hired was already a portfolio company of mine. She thought this was the top of her game. She didn't know she was already on my board. Honestly, Uncle Ray said, wiping crumbs from his cuff, I'm just glad someone in this generation still believes in real business. He nodded at Brooke. All these hustles now, food trucks, coffee carts, influencer nonsense, it's like no one wants to work anymore. His eyes flicked to me for just a second, just enough. And this brunch is lovely, Clara, Aunt Lena added quickly. So down to earth, so authentic. Farmhouse minimalism, Brooke said with a grin. It's a vibe. Pinterest loves this kind of earnestness. I smiled. They were still chewing through scones I developed the recipe for. Sipping blends from beans I sourced, roasted, packaged, and distributed under 3 different gourmet labels. Each cup priced higher wholesale than their compliments were worth. You ever think about franchising? Brooke asked suddenly. Like, if you branded it right, your little coffee thing could maybe hit the farmer's market circuit. We're working on some scaling, I replied. Oh, she raised an eyebrow. Like adding a cart. Something like that. Actually, I just signed a distribution deal to supply premium roast to 3 airport lounges and a luxury hotel chain. But sure, you always did love coffee, Aunt Lena added. Remember how you used to pretend your dolls ran cafes? Well, my mom said, setting down her glass. At least she's consistent. They laughed, they thought I was small. That I stayed small. That I'd traded Wall Street for whipped cream and foam art. What they didn't know was, I never left Wall Street. I simply bought the building next to it. And when they talked about real business, they didn't know I held 40% of their retirement fund through a private equity vehicle wrapped in 3 layers of shell companies. So, do you still make coffee yourself? Brooke asked. Every morning, I said. I like to stay connected. She nodded as if that confirmed it. Clara's still down there. Still pouring espresso shots. Still irrelevant. I didn't correct her. Not when the silence was working so beautifully. Ding, buzz, ping, one notification, then another. Then, a chorus. Every phone at the table lit up at once. Brooke was the first to glance down, then Uncle Ray, then Aunt Lena, then my mother. Each face slackened, every fork froze midair. Wait, Brooke blinked, scrolling. This can't be right. I already knew what it said. Breaking, the mystery behind Cumberland Equity revealed. Meet Clara Yates, the barista billionaire who built a coffee-to-capital empire. IPO filing confirms she controls $870 in assets. And counting. No one spoke. No one could. I watched their expressions shift, like dominoes falling in reverse. Superiority, right arrow confusion, right arrow realization, right arrow horror. Clara, Brooke whispered, her voice hollow. Is this true? I didn't smile, not yet. Cumberland, I said calmly, is mine, has been for a while now. But, Uncle Ray sputtered, you're the owner. Yes, and the majority shareholder behind 3 of the last 5 acquisitions you bragged about. Brooke stared at her phone like it betrayed her. My funding round, you signed it. Personally, the boutique hotel development, Aunt Lena began, Phoenix Realty Group, I cut in, subsidiary of my holding company. Aunt Lena's jaw dropped. Wait, that vineyard? Uncle Ray mumbled, reaching for his glass of expensive Chardonnay. I've been a member of their wine club for years. It's a lovely place, I nodded. We acquired it last year. My mother had gone pale. You lied to us. No, I said, I just didn't correct your assumptions. Around the table, no one moved. Just the sound of champagne fizzing out, and the soft buzz of the world learning who I really was. So everything we've said was said to someone who already owned your praise, and your companies, and your brunch. I looked down at my phone. The article had gone viral. Barista Billionaire was trending. But here, in this tiny apartment filled with forced smiles and half-eaten scones, silence, delicious, earned silence. Clara, Brooke said, her voice brittle. There must be some mistake. No, I said, there is. I stood slowly, walked around the table. Each step felt like a heartbeat in a vault about to open. I pulled a small envelope from my purse and laid it in front of Brooke. That's your funding contract. Page 7, lead signatory. She opened it with shaking hands. Clara Yates, founder and managing director. She looked up, shattered. You've been in all our meetings, listening, watching, observing, I corrected, and deciding. But you're my cousin. And your boss. Uncle Ray cleared his throat. The hotel deal. Approved by me, I said. Phoenix Realty is one of my shell companies. But I negotiated the deal. You managed the paperwork, I replied. The decisions were already made. Before your pitch deck even loaded. He slumped back. Aunt Lena tried to smile. So, the wine club, the one I've been a member of since 2017. Acquired in 2021. You own it. You've been drinking my label, I said. Cheers. She put her glass down like it had turned to acid. This is a lot, my mother whispered. I turned to her. Do you remember the boutique bistro Brooke loves? She nodded slowly. I bought the building last year, quietly, through a trust. You've been living in this tiny apartment while owning all of that? She asked, stunned. Yes, I said, because I wanted to see something. See what? How you treat someone when you think they have nothing. No one spoke. I looked around the table. All the years of being the afterthought, the coffee girl, the one who threw away her potential. And now they couldn't look me in the eye. I pulled another envelope from my purse, laid it in the center of the table. This is a full asset map. Properties, partnerships, fund allocations. Everything tied to me, directly or indirectly. Why show us now? Brooke asked quietly. I took a breath. Because you never once asked who I was, you only ever asked why I wasn't you. Silence again. Thick, humid, charged, I returned to my seat. Calm, centered. They could sit with the truth now. I'd carried theirs for years. But why? My mother's voice broke through the silence, small, uncertain, and for the first time, fragile. Why live like this? Why hide it from your family? I looked at her for a long moment, longer than I'd ever been allowed to as a child. Because I needed to know, I said, who you are when you think I have nothing. Brooke blinked. You were testing us. No, I said. I was giving you space to show me who you really were. I leaned forward, fingers wrapped around my now cold coffee mug. You see, success is easy to praise, but perceived failure, that's where the masks fall off. I needed to see if you loved me without the numbers, without the titles, without the press coverage. Uncle Ray scoffed but didn't meet my eyes. You left the firm, you walked away. I walked toward something, I said, and none of you ever asked what. You were always so quiet about everything, Aunt Lena said, almost like a defense. Yes, I nodded, and you filled in the silence with your own assumptions. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out over the city I'd quietly bought, piece by piece. You all speak so loudly about success, about image, but you never once asked me who I was becoming. I turned around slowly. I didn't hide to deceive you. I hid because I needed to be unseen long enough to build without interruption, to fail in private, to grow in peace. And once I had enough, I stayed quiet, to see how deeply you'd dig your own hole when you thought I was buried. No one said a word, not because they couldn't, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't echo with shame. I walked back to the table, picked up the final envelope, slipped it into my coat pocket. That one, I said, contains the deed to this apartment. It'll be donated to a local women's fund starting next month. I don't live here anymore. Brooke looked around, stunned. Then where do you live? Where I'm respected. And with that, I smiled, gentle, not cruel, because this was never about revenge. It was about release. Monday morning. I slipped on the blazer they once said made me look more librarian than leader. That same blazer now hung framed on the 45th floor of Cumberland Tower, next to a plaque that read, Women Who Changed Finance. Outside the stock exchange, cameras waited, journalists, microphones, flashes. My name, Clara Yates, was already trending, from coffee cart to Capitol Queen. Wall Street's quiet storm. The woman who built in silence. I stepped up to the podium. Behind me, the Cumberland logo, in front of me, the IPO bell. A reporter leaned forward, asking the question that had echoed all week. Clara, with everything you've built, why did you stay silent for so long? Why live so modestly when you were running an empire? I looked at him, then straight into the camera, then I smiled. Because noise doesn't build empires, focus does. Because when people think you have nothing, they show you everything. Their pride, their pity, their prejudice. I didn't fake being small. I just refused to perform being big. I didn't need to prove anything. I needed time. I needed space to grow, uninterrupted. I rang the bell, the crowd erupted, green lights lit up the ticker, stocks opened above projection. Cumberland went public at $870 million. And the girl they once laughed at had become the woman they now couldn't ignore. Final scene. That night, I returned to the cafe where it all began. Flagship store now. My name on the lease. Franchise expansion underway. Still, I pulled a shot of espresso, just one, just for me. The cafe was quiet, peaceful. Behind the counter, a new sign hung on the wall. Success isn't loud, it's lasting. I took a sip. Slow, warm, simple, just the way I've always liked it. If you've ever been underestimated, called a failure, or laughed at for dreaming bigger than your title, remember, silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of something legendary being built. Comment, "I've been there," if this story hit home. Subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge and silent triumph.